Do you ever think about those 60 Christmas recipes that once filled our tables but no one makes anymore? These Christmas recipes brought warmth, celebration, and the feeling of being together in a way nothing else could. When did we start letting moments like that fade? Chex Party Mix, homemade and fresh from the oven, was the heartbeat of 1980s gatherings. A blend of wheat, corn, and rice squares tossed with butter, Worcestershire sauce, and spices, baked until crisp and golden. It was poured into big wooden bowls, filling the air with the scent of toasted cereal and butter. Every handful tasted different, some salty, some garlicky, all delicious. People munched it while opening gifts, watching television, or playing charades. It was snack food made personal, better than anything store-bought. Making it was half the joy. Shaking the pan, checking the oven, tasting for just the right crunch. Every family had its own twist: extra peanuts, more pretzels, or even a touch of cayenne. Chex Mix wasn't glamorous, but it was real, the taste of laughter and long nights spent together. No 1980s Christmas felt complete without it. Popcorn balls were the handmade treasures of Christmas long before wrapping paper and plastic toys ruled the season. Families gathered around the stove, boiling sugar and syrup until it bubbled thick, then pouring it over fresh popped corn. The mixture hissed and popped, and everyone worked fast, buttering their hands to form perfect spheres before the syrup cooled. They were tied with red string or wrapped in wax paper, ready to be tucked into stockings or passed to neighbors. Popcorn balls were joy you could hold, cheap, cheerful, and filled with heart. The sweetness clung to your fingers, and the smell lingered in the air long after the snow outside had settled. They represented a time when Christmas gifts were handmade and happiness came from the smallest things. No store could ever match that kind of satisfaction. Today they are nearly extinct, remembered only by the few who still make them for old time's sake. But for those who do, every sticky bite is a memory reborn. Lemon juice bottles sat quietly in the pantry, but they worked wonders. Those green glass bottles were Grandma's secret weapon for glazes, lemon bars, and punch bowls. She said a splash of lemon made everything honest. It balanced all the sugar of December. She would twist off the cap, pour just enough into her bowl, and the whole room would smell brighter. It added sparkle to cakes, depth to frosting, and tang to her famous holiday punch that had people guessing the secret ingredient for years. Lemon made even the simplest desserts taste thoughtful. Grandma never waited to buy it because she knew one bottle was never enough. It was her silent helper, her bottled sunshine, the flavor that kept her kitchen glowing through the coldest nights. Tomato aspic was Thanksgiving's strangest star, a savory gelatin molded with tomato juice, onions, and celery. Served chilled and sliced, it was both salad and side, a holdover from when gelatin meant sophistication. Its tangy flavor paired surprisingly well with turkey and dressing, offering brightness amid the richness. Guests either loved it or politely pushed it aside, but it always sparked conversation. In the 1950s, it symbolized elegance, something daring for the dinner table. Housewives followed recipes clipped from magazines, proud of its quivering perfection. Today, it's more curiosity than cuisine, but once it was a badge of culinary ambition. Tomato aspic was a dish of confidence, bold, unusual, and unapologetically of its time. Carrot and raisin Christmas cake was the taste of resilience turned into dessert. Born in lean years when sugar was scarce, it used grated carrots and raisins to bring natural sweetness and texture. The batter was spiced with cinnamon and nutmeg, the scent wrapping around the kitchen like a promise that even tough times could hold joy. When baked, the cake came out moist and golden, speckled with fruit and flecks of orange. A thick cream cheese icing melted over the top, tangy and smooth against the dense crumb. It was wholesome, yes, but indulgent too, proof that frugality could still make something beautiful. Families baked it out of necessity. They kept making it out of love. Carrot and raisin cake was the kind of dessert that nourished both body and spirit, reminding everyone that sweetness could come from the earth as well as the heart. It became a Christmas mainstay, sometimes layered with pineapple or walnuts, always touched by care. No one thought of it as fancy. It didn't need to be. Its beauty was in its honesty, in the way it turned hardship into comfort and scarcity into celebration. Taco salad trifle was the ultimate 1980s showpiece. Layers of lettuce, spiced beef, cheese, salsa, and crushed Doritos stacked in a glass bowl like edible confetti. It was part meal, part decoration, and fully beloved. Every layer told a story of color and crunch, a fusion of convenience and creativity. The Doritos gave it a neon orange glow that fit the decade perfectly. People admired it before eating it, marveling at its brightness. The first scoop was always a little chaotic, but that was part of the fun. It wasn't about precision. It was about plenty. This dish embodied the optimism of its era: fun, fearless, and a little loud. The crunch of chips, the spice of taco meat, the cool tang of sour cream, it was impossible not to smile. Taco salad trifle wasn't subtle, but neither was the 1980s. It was the taste of joy layered high. Clove-spiced ham with pineapple rings was the glittering centerpiece of post-war Christmas dinners, a dish that managed to feel both elegant and practical at once. In the 1950s, every holiday table wanted to look like a magazine cover, and this ham was the shining star, scored in neat diamond patterns, studded with cloves like jewels, and dressed in sweet slices of golden pineapple held down by red cherries. The glaze of brown sugar and mustard bubbled to perfection, coating the ham in a glossy finish that filled the kitchen with a scent no candle could imitate. It was a dish of showmanship, born from an age obsessed with hospitality and abundance after years of war and rationing. Housewives took pride in presenting something that looked grand, even if it came from a can or on a tight budget. Over time, though, the pineapple rings and shiny glaze became symbols of dated taste, too flashy, too artificial for modern sensibilities. Yet for many families, that smell of cloves and caramelized fruit is still the scent of home, of laughter around a crowded table, of everything the holidays once meant. Ginger snap crumbs were Grandma's secret ingredient long before anyone called it clever. She used them for pie crusts instead of graham crackers, crushing them with a rolling pin until the kitchen smelled like warm spice and molasses. Lemon pies, pumpkin pies, even cheesecake, all of them got a ginger snap base in her hands. The flavor added a kick that balanced the sweetness perfectly. You could taste the Christmas spirit in every crumb: ginger, cinnamon, and just a whisper of heat. She never bought pre-made crusts, claiming they lacked character. Instead, she pressed those crumbs by hand into pans, humming while she worked. The edges browned beautifully in the oven, crisp and fragrant, making every dessert feel more alive. When guests asked for her recipe, she always said it was nothing special, though everyone knew it was. Those crumbs were proof that even leftovers from a cookie jar could build something unforgettable. The crunch was just right, sturdy but tender, like a memory that refuses to fade. She saved every broken cookie from tins throughout December, knowing they would find a second life. It was resourcefulness disguised as creativity, and it gave her desserts a story baked into every bite. No one ever looked at pie the same way again after hers. Mock pecan pie was the Depression-era dessert that refused to give up sweetness. When real pecans were too expensive, cooks used oats, breadcrumbs, or crushed crackers instead. Mixed with brown sugar and syrup, the filling baked into a chewy, caramel-like layer that mimicked the flavor and texture of the real thing. The crust was often handmade, rolled thin to save flour, but still tender from lard or shortening. For many, it wasn't just a substitute. It was a small act of defiance against scarcity. Families cut into it proudly, knowing they'd turned less into something that felt like enough. Mock pecan pie was the proof that celebration could exist even when times were hard. Though forgotten today, it once symbolized resilience baked golden brown. Pound cake with rum glaze was the gift that never failed, wrapped not in paper but in scent. Dense and buttery, it baked to a rich golden brown, its crust crisping just enough to hold the glaze. While still warm, cooks brushed it generously with rum syrup, letting the sweet warmth soak deep into every crumb. The cake grew more flavorful each day, the rum mellowing as the butter deepened. Sliced thick and served plain or with whipped cream, it carried the kind of comfort that lingered long after the holidays ended. Some baked it in round molds, others in loaf pans, all knowing it tasted of generosity. Pound cake with rum glaze was more than dessert. It was gratitude shared, a symbol of time well spent and kindness well given. Sometimes it was mailed across states, wrapped in wax paper and tied with ribbon, its scent escaping through the box before it was opened. One bite carried the promise of home, no matter how far away you were. Ham and cheese pinwheels were a host's best friend, rolled, sliced, and ready before guests even arrived. Thin deli ham wrapped around a spread of cream cheese, sometimes with green onions or pickles for bite, all cut into perfect spirals that looked fancier than they were. They sat on platters like edible ornaments, pink and white with swirls of nostalgia. The taste was familiar, simple, and addictive, a mix of salty, creamy, and cool. They fit the 1980s ideal of effortless elegance, the kind of dish that impressed without stress. Moms made them by the dozens, sealing each roll tight in plastic wrap before chilling them overnight to slice the next morning. They appeared at every gathering, from office potlucks to living room parties, always vanishing first. Pinwheels were proof that simplicity could still sparkle under holiday lights. In a decade of abundance, they were the perfect bite of comfort, balanced, nostalgic, and endlessly satisfying. Cranberry upside-down cake was once the shining gem of cast-iron Christmas desserts, glowing ruby red under its caramelized top. Housewives poured batter over a layer of cranberries, sugar, and butter, then baked it until the syrup bubbled up through the cake. When flipped out of the pan, it looked like something pulled straight from a holiday dream, tart fruit gleaming beneath a soft golden crumb. The contrast of sweet and sour gave it a personality all its own. Cranberry upside-down cake was the bridge between thrift and beauty, using everyday ingredients to create something truly elegant. It was often served warm with whipped cream or a drizzle of custard, the kind of dessert that made winter evenings feel softer. As pies and pastries took over holiday menus, the humble upside-down cake faded quietly from the spotlight. But one taste of its buttery crumb and bright cranberry glaze could bring back the glow of candlelight and the sound of laughter echoing through the hall. Knox gelatine packets were the magic behind every shimmering dessert on Grandma's table. Those small envelopes looked unassuming, but they held endless creativity. She used them for molded salads that jiggled with pride and creamy, no-bake cheesecakes that stole the spotlight. The process fascinated everyone, boiling, stirring, waiting for the transformation from liquid to jewel-like solid. Sometimes she would suspend fruit inside, and children would stare, amazed at strawberries floating mid-air. Knox was part science, part art, and all nostalgia. The molded desserts were conversation pieces, sparkling under candlelight. No Christmas buffet felt complete without one. In a decade when style mattered as much as taste, Knox gelatine turned simple ingredients into something spectacular. It was proof that even humble packets could make a meal feel like a celebration. Baker's unsweetened cocoa was one of those ingredients Grandma treated like gold. The small tin was always the first thing she bought before the holidays, long before cocoa became trendy again. She used it for hot chocolate, for cakes, and for frostings that tasted like heaven. It had a deep, almost smoky flavor that you could never get from instant mixes. She would whisk it with sugar and milk on the stove, creating cups of comfort for anyone who walked through her door. The smell alone could make a bad day better. For baking, it gave her chocolate cakes that were dense and rich, the kind you could feel in your heart. It was not sweet on its own, but that was the beauty of it. You had to build the sweetness yourself, the same way she built Christmas, one careful touch at a time. Pineapple bread stuffing was the post-war homemaker's answer to modern flair and cheerful flavor, an invention born from both optimism and canned convenience. During the 1950s, when kitchen shelves gleamed with new tin treasures, canned pineapple became a symbol of prosperity and modern living. Home cooks found inventive ways to work it into everything from desserts to main courses, and Thanksgiving was no exception. The tangy sweetness of pineapple blended beautifully with the savory richness of butter, bread, and sage, giving the old-fashioned dressing a tropical twist. Cubes of stale bread soaked up melted butter and broth, creating a base that was tender yet golden around the edges. Bits of pineapple were folded in last, their juices seeping into the mixture, caramelizing just enough in the oven's heat to form bursts of sweetness. Housewives adored it not only for the taste but for the image it created, bright, new, and forward-looking, just like the age they were living in. It appeared on countless family tables, often baked in Pyrex casseroles or ring molds for extra style. The scent alone, a mix of herbs and fruit, could make guests smile. Though few remember it now, pineapple bread stuffing once embodied everything hopeful about mid-century America: thrift, creativity, and the courage to make something joyful from what was on hand. The first bite was always a moment, quiet, reverent, and a little nostalgic. It wasn't just about the taste, it was about everything that came before it. The mixing, the waiting, the memory of hands that made it long ago. Persimmon pudding cake was the Midwest's secret jewel, humble, amber-colored, and full of slow, steady sweetness. Ripe persimmons, gathered after the frost, were pressed into pulp and mixed with milk, sugar, eggs, and warm spices. The batter poured thick like custard and baked until the edges browned and the center quivered gently. Served warm with whipped cream or vanilla sauce, it carried the texture of a pudding and the heart of a cake. Its flavor was deep and haunting. Somewhere between caramel and fruit, the taste of winter turned tender. Generations passed it down quietly, each claiming their version was just right. Persimmon pudding cake wasn't meant for show. It was meant for comfort, for community, for quiet evenings when the year was almost done and the table still felt full. It was often served in old glass dishes, the kind that clinked when you scooped. In every spoonful was the echo of family voices and the soft sweetness of time slowing down. Spinach artichoke dip in a bread bowl was cozy luxury, bubbling hot under the glow of Christmas lights. The smell alone, garlic, cheese, and cream, pulled people from across the room. Served in a hollowed-out round loaf, it was a dish made to be shared, torn apart piece by piece. The bread edges soaked in the dip, turning every bite soft and rich. It was a meal and memory rolled into one, the kind of appetizer that made people gather close. Each spoonful felt indulgent, yet familiar, like comfort disguised as sophistication. It was the warmth of the 1980s kitchen captured in a single dish, cheesy, creamy, and endlessly comforting. It proved that hospitality didn't need polish, just heart and plenty of melted cheese. By the end of the night, all that remained was an empty crust and full stomachs, a quiet testament to the decades' love for food that brought people together. Suet pudding was a relic from another century, dense, steamed, and spiced with memories of hearth and hardship. It came from the days when ovens were rare and every meal was slow-cooked with purpose. Housewives mixed suet, the rendered fat of beef or mutton, with molasses, dried fruit, and flour, then tied it up in cloth and steamed it for hours. The kitchen would fill with the scent of nutmeg and cinnamon, the windows fogged from the heat of boiling pots. When the pudding emerged, it was heavy, fragrant, and rich, more nourishing than fancy. Suet pudding was the Christmas dessert of settlers, sailors, and survivors, each slice a testament to endurance. Served with a warm sauce or a dollop of cream, it felt like a feast in a time when feasts were rare. It has long vanished from American tables, deemed too old-fashioned, too heavy. Yet somewhere between the steam and the spice, it held the essence of a holiday that valued warmth over show. Clabber Girl baking powder was the silent partner behind every successful holiday morning. Grandma trusted that red and white can more than any recipe book. She said it never failed her, and it never did. Whether she was making fluffy biscuits, golden pancakes, or quick breads, that little can made them rise perfectly every time. You could hear the faint fizz as it hit the wet ingredients, a quiet sign that breakfast would soon fill the house with warmth. Clabber Girl sat beside the flour, slightly dusty but dignified, always there when she needed it. She never waited to buy it because Christmas baking without it was unthinkable. The biscuits it made were tall and tender, the kind that melted under butter and honey. Every bite reminded you of patience and practice, the kind of holiday magic that came from doing things the right way. Reynolds aluminum foil in its holiday pack was as much a Christmas essential as tinsel or lights. Grandma bought rolls of it early, certain the stores would sell out before Christmas week. The box had a shimmer to it, promising perfection in every roast and pie. She lined pans, covered turkeys, and wrapped leftovers with military precision. When she folded foil over pies, the crimped edges looked like silver lace. It caught the glow of the kitchen light, reflecting warmth and order in the middle of chaos. Even wrapping leftovers felt festive when done with Reynolds foil. Grandma said it kept food fresher, but maybe it just kept things feeling special. By the end of the season, the empty box was proof of a well-fed family and a job done right. Scalloped oysters were the pride of seaside Thanksgivings, a dish layered with memory, comfort, and quiet elegance. Fresh oysters were shucked by hand, their salty liquor saved to moisten the layers of buttered cracker crumbs that surrounded them. Every layer glistened with cream, butter, and a touch of black pepper before being baked until the top turned golden and crisp. The aroma filled the house, rich, briny, and buttery all at once, like a meeting of the ocean and the hearth. In the 1800s and early 1900s, this dish symbolized refinement, served in silver dishes at hotels or in simple casseroles on coastal family tables. Each bite was a harmony of textures, the crunch of crumbs, the softness of oysters, and the silken warmth of cream. Inland families would sometimes make it with canned oysters, preserving the flavor even far from the shore. It was indulgence made accessible, a way for modest homes to taste luxury. Over time, as oysters grew expensive and palates shifted toward lighter fare, scalloped oysters slipped quietly from the holiday menu. Yet its spirit remains in old cookbooks, handwritten in fading ink beside notes like Papa's favorite. For those who remember, it was more than food. It was a celebration of place and tradition, a dish that carried the ocean to the table. Coconut angel cake looked like snow fallen on a plate, pure white, airy, and shimmering under soft light. The cake itself was light as breath, whipped with egg whites and layered with frosting so soft it seemed to float. Shredded coconut drifted over the top like fresh flakes, turning every slice into a winter daydream. It was delicate yet rich, festive yet peaceful, a favorite for church suppers and family feasts alike. Coconut angel cake wasn't loud or luxurious. It was gentle, graceful, and unforgettable, a taste of innocence dressed up for celebration. The frosting was often a cloud of boiled sugar and whipped egg whites, glossy and ethereal, sticking lightly to the fingers. Cutting into it felt like breaking through snow, soft resistance followed by sweetness. Served cold, it refreshed rather than weighed down, making it the perfect ending to heavy holiday dinners. It was Christmas purity baked into cake form. Ritz cracker canapes were elegance on a budget, a chance for suburban hosts to feel like caterers. Each buttery round carried a crown of cream cheese, smoked salmon, or a slice of olive, perfectly portioned and camera-ready. The contrast of textures, crisp cracker, creamy spread, salty topping, was irresistible. They were arranged with precision on silver trays, sometimes sprinkled with paprika for flair. Even the simplest versions looked beautiful under twinkling lights. Guests would pick one up, laugh about how fancy they were, and reach for another. Ritz canapes were 1980s ingenuity at its best, small, smart, and endlessly adaptable. You could find them in every home, from modest kitchens to grand dining rooms, because they required nothing but imagination and a box of crackers. They proved that hospitality didn't need luxury, only love and a little cream cheese. Cranberry orange mold shimmered on 1960s Christmas tables like edible stained glass. Bright and tart, it offered a rare burst of color during gray winter days. Housewives poured gelatin over crushed cranberries, orange zest, and bits of celery, sometimes adding nuts for a little crunch. The finished mold was firm, glossy, and ready to slide neatly onto a serving platter, glinting like a ruby centerpiece. Cranberry orange mold was elegance for the everyday cook, a dish that looked expensive but came from a few cans and a bit of patience. It carried the pride of homemaking, the belief that presentation mattered as much as flavor. Families sliced it alongside turkey and ham, its tang balancing the richness of the meal. It was festive, cheerful, and strangely comforting, a recipe that sparkled in the middle of an ordinary dining room. But somewhere along the way, it disappeared. Maybe too bright, too jiggly, too dated for modern taste. Still, for those who grew up watching it wobble in the fridge, the sight alone can take them straight back to Christmas Eve. Carnation Instant Non-Fat Dry Milk was one of those things Grandma bought weeks before Christmas, and for good reason. It was not just milk, it was insurance. She used it for fudge, pies, puddings, and any recipe that demanded milk when the real thing was already gone. The box sat on her counter, red and white and reliable, a silent promise that no recipe would ever be ruined by shortage. She would mix it into her baking like second nature, measuring without measuring, trusting the habit of her hands. It made everything smoother, richer, more comforting. Sometimes she even added a spoonful to her coffee just because it made her smile. Carnation's powder was part of the rhythm of the season, a symbol of preparation and care. It proved that you did not need much to make Christmas perfect, just foresight, patience, and love. Sweet potato soufflé was the dish that blurred the line between side and dessert. Mashed sweet potatoes were whipped until airy, blended with butter, eggs, and sugar, then topped with pecans or a crumble of brown sugar. It baked into a golden, fragrant cloud that smelled like comfort itself. This was Southern elegance, a holiday staple that felt indulgent yet familiar. At church potlucks and family dinners, it brought smiles before the first bite. The sweetness paired beautifully with the saltiness of the turkey, making it unforgettable. In many homes, it replaced pie altogether, the star of both dinner and dessert. Over the years, it's been overshadowed by marshmallow-topped versions, but the original soufflé remains unmatched. Sweet potato soufflé was more than food. It was love-baked light, the taste of home dressed up for celebration. Jam cake with caramel icing was Kentucky's pride, dark and spiced and impossibly moist. The secret was blackberry jam folded into the batter, giving it color and tang that sugar alone could never match. Cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg filled the air as it baked, turning kitchens into memory. Once cooled, a thick pour of caramel icing sealed the deal, glossy, rich, and sweet with just a hint of smoke. It wasn't fancy to look at, but it tasted like the holidays should, full, deep, and a little bittersweet. Families baked it once a year, slicing it slowly so it would last through Christmas week. Every crumb carried the warmth of Southern kitchens and the quiet satisfaction of something truly homemade. Some bakers swapped the blackberry jam for plum or fig, giving each version its own personality. The icing was the test of patience, stirred endlessly until the sugar darkened just shy of burnt. The first bite was like memory itself, tender, sweet, and tinged with nostalgia. Jam cake wasn't just dessert, it was heritage written in flour, sugar, and love. Shrimp cocktail rings were the crown jewel of every 1980s Christmas spread, a shimmering circle of elegance straight from the freezer aisle. Arranged neatly on crushed ice, tails curled in perfect formation, they sat beside a cup of tangy red cocktail sauce that burned just enough to feel grown up. Every host knew presentation mattered. The ring had to sparkle under the dining room light, framed by lemon wedges and sprigs of parsley. It was seafood made accessible, a touch of class on a plastic tray. Kids whispered about how fancy it felt to have shrimp at home, while adults dipped and chatted like movie stars from a commercial. It was the decade when convenience met glamour, and nothing embodied that balance like shrimp cocktail. The taste was cold, sharp, and addictive, a bite of briny sweetness followed by the burn of horseradish. It was both luxury and nostalgia, a dish that told you Christmas had officially arrived. Even after the party ended, that empty ring on the counter felt like a badge of success, the sign of a host who knew exactly how to make the night sparkle. Spiced apple snow was a dessert born from imagination and a few humble ingredients, long before electric mixers or instant puddings ever existed. It was made by beating stewed apples with sugar, spice, and whipped egg whites until it transformed into something light as air, a pale, cloud-like confection with a cinnamon glow. In colonial kitchens, it was considered both elegant and thrifty, a sweet reward after a year of careful preservation. By the 1800s, spiced apple snow graced Christmas tables as a symbol of simplicity done beautifully. It melted on the tongue, cool and fragrant, the kind of dessert that did not overwhelm but lingered softly. Children would watch in awe as apples turned into clouds under their mother's spoons, proof that magic could happen in a bowl. It may have vanished from modern cookbooks, but its spirit remains in every whipped cream topping and apple pie filling we still hold dear. Pineapple tidbits and juice from Dole brought sunshine to the coldest winters. Grandma called them her secret for keeping summer alive through Christmas. She used them in ambrosia salads with marshmallows and coconut, or folded them into what she proudly called her Hawaiian casserole, a sweet, creamy dish that somehow worked. The bright yellow cubes gleamed like little jewels, adding a burst of cheer to every table. They came in small cans, always stored in neat stacks, because one was never enough. The juice never went to waste either. It went into punch bowls or cake batters to add a touch of tropical sweetness. There was something joyful about the way she opened that can, drained it carefully, and smiled at the smell of pineapple. It was her way of adding a little paradise to her Midwestern kitchen. Dole pineapple tidbits were proof that Christmas could taste like sunshine if you wanted it to. Marzetti caramel dip was one of those modern marvels Grandma quietly embraced. She discovered it on a trip to the grocery store and never looked back. That glossy caramel came in a round plastic tub with a lid that never sealed quite right, but the taste made up for it. It was thick, buttery, and just sweet enough to make every apple slice a treat. Grandma would bring it out at church potlucks, spooning it into bowls for dipping red and green apple wedges. The children would gather first, their laughter filling the air as they swirled fruit into caramel like it was liquid gold. Even the grown-ups could not resist. It was festive simplicity in its purest form. No stove, no saucepan, no cleanup. Just caramel joy straight from the container. Marzetti was a new kind of tradition, the bridge between old-fashioned baking and the convenience of the modern grocery aisle. Jellied cranberry rings were Thanksgiving's edible art. Homemade cranberry sauce was poured into molds, chilled, and turned out in perfect circles to adorn the holiday spread. The jewel-red rings shimmered beside the turkey, adding color and ceremony to the table. In the mid-century, when presentation was everything, this dish embodied the era's aesthetic pride. Housewives competed to perfect the shape, the smoothness, the glossy finish. The flavor was tart, bright, and just sweet enough to balance the meal. Over time, convenience cans replaced molds and the artistry disappeared. But in those who remember, the memory still glows. The wobble, the shine, the first perfect slice. Jellied cranberry rings were edible nostalgia, a reminder that beauty once had a place at every meal. Moravian sugar cake was Christmas morning in Pennsylvania Dutch homes, soft, sweet, and glistening with butter and brown sugar. The dough began as a yeast bread, proofed slowly until pillowy and light. Once pressed into a pan, fingertips made small dimples across the top, each one catching pools of melted butter, sugar, and cinnamon as it baked. When it came out of the oven, the crust shimmered, caramelized and golden. It wasn't fancy, no frosting, no filling, but it was perfect in its simplicity. Served warm, the cake pulled apart in tender pieces, each one tasting of home, of hearth, of comfort shared among family. It was a humble luxury, born from tradition and care, and it never lasted long once cut. Moravian sugar cake was proof that true sweetness doesn't come from excess. It comes from patience, warmth, and a little faith in rising dough. Some families baked it only once a year, saving the recipe for Christmas morning when the air smelled of wood smoke and cinnamon. It was eaten by hand, with coffee or milk, the sugar crackling softly beneath each bite. Every pan told a story of faith, frugality, and love that rose like the dough itself. Vienna sausage kebabs were pure 1980s creativity on a stick. Tiny canned sausages skewered with cubes of pineapple and glossy maraschino cherries, arranged in patterns that looked more like decorations than food. They sparkled under kitchen lights, the kind of kitsch that made every buffet feel like a celebration. Sweet, salty, and a little absurd, they balanced nostalgia and novelty in each bite. You could find them at office parties, church socials, and every Christmas Eve potluck, standing proudly on styrofoam displays covered in aluminum foil. There was something endlessly fun about eating food on a toothpick, and these kebabs knew it. They were the kind of appetizer that didn't take itself too seriously, just joy, convenience, and a flash of color. Kids loved them, adults pretended not to, and everyone reached for seconds. In a decade obsessed with presentation, Vienna sausage kebabs proved that even the simplest ingredients could feel festive when dressed in red and gold. By the time the party ended, all that remained were empty skewers and sticky fingers, a sign that whimsy never goes out of style. Gingerbread trifle was the unsung hero of old-fashioned Christmas tables, a layered dessert that married warmth and sweetness in every bite. It began with leftover gingerbread, dense, dark, and fragrant with molasses, crumbled into pieces and stacked with custard or whipped cream. Sometimes cooks added bits of stewed fruit or poured coffee over the layers for richness. The result was humble and heavenly, a dessert born from thrift and creativity. No one wasted cake back then. Everything could be repurposed into something new and comforting. The contrast of soft cake and silky custard made every spoonful taste like a memory of home. The trifle bowl itself was a display of abundance, its layers glowing through the glass like stripes of gold and brown. Modern desserts might be neater or sweeter, but few carry the same heart. Gingerbread trifle was proof that the best holiday recipes were never about perfection. They were about care, family, and the joy of turning leftovers into love. Jarred mincemeat filling was both mysterious and magnificent. Grandma always bought it early, long before the stores filled with shoppers. She would hold that glass jar like a treasure, the dark filling inside glistening with fruit and spice. No one really knew what went into it, and she never explained, only calling it her Christmas magic. The smell was unmistakable once it hit the pie shell: apples, raisins, cinnamon, and something deeper, something that felt ancient. Her mince pies were not for everyone, but the ones who loved them swore they tasted like memory itself. It was sweet, warm, and a little grown up. Every Christmas, that jar connected her to generations before her, the kind of tradition that needed no recipe card. Baked celery casserole was the understated elegance of early 20th century dining, the kind of dish that spoke softly but impressed deeply. Tender celery pieces were simmered just until translucent, then folded into a creamy white sauce thickened with flour and milk. A topping of buttered breadcrumbs crowned the casserole, baking into a golden crust that broke away to reveal tender, velvety layers beneath. It carried a mild, nutty aroma that filled the kitchen with comfort, its flavor delicate yet undeniably rich. Celery was not always an everyday vegetable. Once a mark of sophistication, it appeared on fine dinner tables in cut glass vases before making its way into recipes like this. Housewives saw it as a chance to elevate the ordinary, to prove that refinement did not require extravagance. The dish often accompanied roasted meats, its creaminess balancing the meal's heavier notes. Served bubbling in porcelain dishes, it looked elegant enough for company but familiar enough for family. Over time, as stronger spices and bolder flavors took hold, its quiet grace faded into memory. Yet those who remember it can still recall the taste of care, the way every bite felt calm, composed, and complete. Baked celery casserole remains a forgotten whisper of a time when gentleness itself was flavor. Oatmeal spice cake was the definition of comfort born from scarcity. Oats were soaked until tender, then folded into a spiced batter of brown sugar and butter, transforming the humble pantry staple into celebration. It baked into a moist, hearty cake that smelled of home and holidays, its top sprinkled with nuts or coconut for texture. Frosted with caramel or cream cheese icing, it became rich enough to rival any fancy dessert. Oatmeal spice cake carried the heart of every family who learned to make do and make joy anyway. Each bite was gratitude, sweetened by memory. The oats gave the cake a softness that felt like warmth itself, the spices wrapping around the senses like a blanket. Even when times were lean, a pan of this cake could fill a house with hope. It wasn't just dessert. It was comfort served on a plate, proof that love always finds a way to rise. It was a recipe that aged with grace, passed down in stained notebooks and remembered by instinct, never needing precision to taste just right. Ham-wrapped asparagus spears brought elegance to 1980s Christmas parties without ever needing effort. Each stalk was blanched until tender, wrapped in a thin layer of salty ham, brushed with butter, and baked until the edges crisped. They looked delicate on silver trays, lined up like edible ornaments. You could find them at office parties with punch bowls and tinsel, or at church gatherings where casseroles filled every table. Guests would grab them two at a time, laughing as grease glistened on napkins. The combination was simple but powerful: the salty bite of ham, the earthiness of asparagus, the warmth of the oven. They were the kind of food that said, "grown up." Yet everyone from teenagers to grandmothers devoured them. Sometimes a drizzle of hollandaise turned them fancy. Sometimes just a sprinkle of black pepper made them shine. It was the decade's idea of effortless sophistication, refined but reachable. Every host who served them knew the secret. It was not about complexity, it was about confidence. Ham-wrapped asparagus spears were holiday charm on a plate, one perfect bite at a time, embodying the 1980s love for elegance that came straight from a can or freezer, yet somehow still felt like magic. Potato candy was one of those desserts that sounded like a mistake, but tasted like a miracle. Born in Appalachian kitchens, it began with a single mashed potato, a cheap, filling staple turned unexpectedly sweet. Cooks would mix the potato with powdered sugar until it formed a dough, roll it out flat, and spread a layer of peanut butter across the top before rolling it tight like a jelly log. The result was a swirled candy, soft and rich, that melted in your mouth with the flavor of simplicity itself. It was a Christmas favorite for families with little to spare, proof that even the humblest ingredient could become something special. Children would slice the rolls and sneak bites while they were still soft, unable to wait for them to firm up in the cool air. Potato candy was a sweet born of imagination and survival, a dessert that turned necessity into joy. It may not fit modern ideas of confectionery art, but in those lean years, it was as treasured as any box of chocolates. Baker's semi-sweet chocolate squares were the definition of Christmas patience. Grandma would melt them slowly over the stove, stirring until they turned into a glossy ribbon of chocolate perfection. It was the smell of home, of fudge cooling on wax paper, and children waiting with spoons. She never rushed it, never used shortcuts, because these squares demanded respect. The result was the smoothest, richest fudge anyone had ever tasted. Never too sweet, never too soft, always just right. Neighbors would bring tins hoping she might share. She never wrote down the recipe, but she always said it started with Baker's chocolate and a steady hand. The squares may have been small, but they built empires of holiday joy. Ritz crackers were one of those things Grandma never ran out of in December. The red box sat proudly on the counter, waiting for the parade of cheese balls, dips, and casseroles that made Christmas sparkle. Ritz was more than a cracker. It was a foundation. Grandma crushed them into buttery crumbs to top casseroles or rolled them around deviled ham for church potlucks. The crunch was perfection, light yet rich, and it seemed to make everything taste a little more special. Kids would sneak a few plain, straight from the sleeve, while Grandma looked the other way with a smile. When guests arrived unannounced, she would whip up something fancy in minutes, and Ritz was always the star. The golden round edges and that slightly sweet, salty taste were comfort wrapped in convenience. Back then, buying multiple boxes before Christmas was not excess, it was preparation. You could build a holiday buffet with nothing but Ritz and imagination. pumpkin chiffon pie brought lightness to a holiday known for richness. Created in the post-war era, it reimagined the classic pumpkin pie into something airy and elegant. The filling was whipped with egg whites or gelatin, giving it a soft, cloud-like texture that melted in the mouth. It represented innovation, America's shift toward modern, refined desserts. Housewives embraced it as the perfect blend of tradition and progress, offering all the pumpkin flavor without the heaviness. The glossy, golden filling sat in a flaky crust, often topped with whipped cream swirls. Served chilled, it was a refreshing finish to a day of feasting. As time went on, traditional pies reclaimed the spotlight, and this airy cousin quietly disappeared. But for a few shining decades, pumpkin chiffon pie was Thanksgiving sophistication on a plate, a reminder that even old traditions can take flight. Hickory nut cake was an Appalachian treasure, soft, nutty, and rare as the hickory trees themselves. Families gathered the nuts in autumn, cracking each one by hand with hammers and stones, saving them for special occasions. The batter was simple: butter, eggs, flour, sugar. But once those wild nuts went in, it turned golden and fragrant. Baked low and slow, the cake came out tender, its flavor deep and earthy, the taste of the forest wrapped in sweetness. It was a celebration of the land and the labor it took to live from it. Served at Christmas, it carried the pride of work well done and the comfort of home. Hickory nut cake was proof that wealth could be measured not in gold, but in generosity, in time, effort, and the joy of something made by hand and shared by heart. The hickory trees gave few nuts, and gathering enough for one cake could take days, which made each slice taste even more precious. Often glazed with a simple vanilla icing or served plain with coffee, it was a dessert that needed nothing more. The flavor was pure, ancient, and enduring. A quiet masterpiece baked in mountain kitchens where every ingredient was earned, not bought. Cold pasta salad with Miracle Whip was the every woman's dish of the 1980s, bright, colorful, and unapologetically creamy. Spiraled noodles tossed with diced ham, peas, and shredded cheese, all bound by that sweet, tangy dressing that tasted like summer disguised as winter cheer. It came in a pastel Tupperware bowl, carried proudly by aunts who knew it would be the first side to disappear. It was easy, cheerful food, the kind you made with what was in the fridge and never worried about proportions. Each forkful tasted like laughter, like the freedom of potluck meals where nobody judged and everyone ate twice. The coldness was refreshing, a welcome break from the heavier dishes, and the sweetness of the dressing tied it all together. It was a salad that never aimed for perfection, only satisfaction. In the heart of the 1980s, that was enough, and that is why we still remember it. Mincemeat tarts were the tiny treasures of holiday baking, rich with spice and memory. Each one held a spoonful of sweet, boozy fruit filling, apples, raisins, currants, and a splash of brandy, wrapped in a delicate pastry shell. The scent alone could make a house feel festive, filling every room with warmth and nostalgia. Mincemeat came from old British tradition, but American cooks made it their own, often skipping the actual meat and leaning into spice and sweetness instead. These tarts were made in batches, cooled on windowsills and packed into tins as gifts for friends and neighbors. They were a sign of generosity, of effort, of care taken in every fold of the dough. Few people make them now, maybe because they take time or because modern taste leans simpler, but in every bite of those old tarts was a story, a link to Christmases when home felt smaller but love felt bigger. Canned asparagus spears were one of those rare things Grandma called a holiday luxury. They were expensive enough that she only bought them once a year, usually around the same time she started her Christmas shopping. She would chill them overnight and serve them on a glass platter lined with lettuce, each spear glistening under the kitchen lights. A spoonful of mayonnaise went on top, followed by a gentle dusting of paprika that gave it that festive glow. It was elegance on a budget, the kind of dish that looked fancier than it really was. The texture was soft, tender, and a little briny, but no one complained because it was a sign of the season. Guests would take small portions, savoring the novelty of having asparagus in December. Grandma always smiled, proud that something so simple could feel so special. Those canned spears might not have been garden fresh, but they carried the same care as any homemade dish. Every bite reminded everyone at the table that Christmas was not about extravagance, it was about intention. The asparagus platter always stood beside the ham and cranberry relish, understated but dignified. The clink of the serving fork against the dish marked its presence, quiet but constant. In a decade of frozen foods and boxed mixes, it was still her nod to refinement, her way of saying celebration without saying excess. It was love served cold, delicate, and deliberate. Celery stuffed with pimento cheese was once the opening act of Thanksgiving, a crunchy, creamy promise of good things to come. Long before appetizers became elaborate spreads, this simple treat graced every holiday table. The recipe was pure genius, crisp celery sticks filled with a tangy mixture of shredded cheddar, chopped pimentos, and just enough mayonnaise to hold it all together. The result was cool, sharp, and savory, a perfect balance of texture and flavor. Guests would hover near the relish tray, talking and laughing as they nibbled, the sound of clinking plates and distant roasting turkey filling the background. Housewives loved the simplicity. It could be made hours ahead, arranged neatly on platters, and served with pride. In Southern homes especially, pimento cheese was a point of identity, each family claiming their own version as best. The celery gave it structure, the cheese gave it heart. As food culture modernized, this quiet classic was replaced by charcuterie boards and fancier hors d'oeuvres. But there was a kind of honesty in it, fresh, handmade, and perfectly nostalgic. Celery stuffed with pimento cheese was more than a snack. It was hospitality itself, bite-sized and smiling. Apple Dapple cake was the shining star of 1960s bake sales and Christmas potlucks, the kind of dessert that needed no decoration to steal the show. Chunks of tart apple and toasted pecans hid inside a rich batter bound together by brown sugar and oil that made every bite moist and glossy. Once baked, it was drenched in a hot caramel glaze that soaked deep into the crumb, turning the cake sticky, sweet, and irresistible. Its scent, a mix of cinnamon, butter, and baked apple, filled entire neighborhoods, calling friends to drop by just for a taste. It was simple enough for weekday baking, but special enough for holidays, a cake that radiated homemade warmth. Apple Dapple cake was more than dessert. It was affection you could eat, made for sharing and remembering, the kind of sweetness that never went out of style. Some families baked it with walnuts or added coconut flakes. Others swore by grating the apples fine for a softer crumb. It didn't matter. Every version worked its own kind of magic. Served slightly warm, it was the taste of home itself. Sweet, familiar, and always worth the wait. Cocktail franks and barbecue sauce were the sticky soul of any 1980s Christmas gathering. They simmered in slow cookers for hours, the sweet smoky scent filling every corner of the house. Made from nothing more than cocktail sausages and bottled sauce, they somehow managed to taste like home. People would gather near the pot, spearing them with toothpicks, each bite warm and addictive. It was the food of laughter and conversation, casual enough for a family gathering, yet loved enough for a corporate one. The sauce clung thickly, the flavor sweet and tangy with just enough spice to make it memorable. By midnight, the pot was always empty, the bottom sticky and scraped clean. Cocktail franks were proof that even the simplest recipe could feel festive when shared. They were bite-sized happiness, a tradition that never went out of style because it never stopped bringing people together. Sweet potato biscuits with honey butter were Christmas morning comfort, soft and golden, smelling of hearth and happiness. Made from mashed sweet potatoes mixed with flour and butter, they rose in the oven to tender perfection, their edges slightly crisp, their centers warm and orange. They were served with honey butter that melted on contact, dripping down the sides in golden rivers. For many Southern families, these biscuits were more than breakfast. They were tradition, passed down through generations of careful hands. Sweet potatoes were cheap, plentiful, and symbolic of resourceful joy, proof that sweetness could come from the soil. Families gathered around the kitchen table as the first batch came out, steam curling into the cool morning air. Each bite carried warmth, sweetness, and a whisper of gratitude. Today, few bake them from scratch, but for those who remember, one taste can bring back the light of 100 Christmas mornings long gone. Smucker's apricot preserves were Grandma's secret weapon for turning any main dish into something memorable. She would spread it beneath the glaze of her Christmas ham, watching as the golden fruit cooked into a sticky sweetness that caught the light. The scent was both savory and sunny, filling the kitchen with warmth. Sometimes she spooned a bit onto toast while she cooked, unable to resist its rich, smooth flavor. Smucker's was more than a jam. It was a bridge between sweet and salt, old and new. It caramelized beautifully, clinging to meat like a coat of glass. When guests cut into the ham, they would always ask what made it taste so different, and Grandma would simply smile. That little jar made magic happen every December, proving that simplicity could shine brighter than anything extravagant. It was also her secret to balancing the chaos of cooking, adding brightness wherever things felt too heavy. The preserves went into glazes, cookies, even sauces for chicken, when Christmas leftovers stretched thin. Its scent lingered long after dinner ended, wrapping the house in the comfort of something both simple and luxurious. Smucker's was the essence of the holidays in one jar, sweet, golden, and always dependable. It reminded everyone that joy could come from the smallest, stickiest things. Corn pudding was the comfort food that defined rural Thanksgiving tables. Fresh or canned corn mixed with milk, butter, and eggs created a soft, custard-like bake that melted in your mouth. Its sweetness was subtle, its texture soothing. Farmers' families loved it because it stretched easily. Cheap ingredients made rich by care. It smelled of harvest season and family warmth, served steaming beside turkey and greens. Every spoonful carried the golden taste of cornfields and patience. Some versions added a hint of nutmeg, others relied on pure simplicity. Corn pudding wasn't flashy, but it was dependable, a side dish that grounded the feast. As boxed mixes and fast foods took over, this quiet favorite faded away. But those who grew up with it know that no modern casserole can replace its gentle charm. Corn pudding was humble abundance baked to perfection. Mince pie was the grand finale of old-fashioned Thanksgivings. Snowdrift cake was winter captured in sugar and cream, a vision of snow made edible. The cake itself was light as breath, whipped full of egg whites and folded gently until the batter shimmered like satin. Baked to pale perfection, it emerged tender and airy, the kind of cake that seemed to melt rather than crumble. The frosting was pure white too, a mixture of boiled sugar and whipped meringue, soft as clouds and sweet as a hymn. Shredded coconut drifted over the top like the first snowfall, catching the light and making the whole cake glow. It wasn't loud or rich. It was elegance, born of restraint, a holiday dessert meant for calm nights and candle-lit tables. Once a centerpiece of Christmas dinners, snowdrift cake symbolized grace, the quiet kind that didn't boast but lingered. A single slice felt like peace itself, dissolving on the tongue, leaving only warmth behind. Even now, it remains a forgotten beauty, a whisper of winter mornings when joy was simple and white as sugar. Pineapple cheese spread was the heart of the retro appetizer table, a creamy mix of cheddar, crushed pineapple, and pecans that somehow made perfect sense. It was sweet, tangy, and just rich enough to feel special, shaped into balls, logs, or even molded into Christmas trees and wreaths. Served with buttery crackers, it was the snack people hovered near while waiting for dinner. Its tropical flavor gave a flash of sunshine to winter gatherings, a small rebellion against the cold. The texture was smooth and crunchy all at once, melting slowly as the pineapple's sweetness cut through the salt. This was the 1980s idea of creativity: fun, colorful, and slightly extravagant. You could find it on every family's best china, sitting proudly beside celery sticks and olives on toothpicks. It carried warmth in every scoop, laughter in every bite, and a kind of holiday cheer that no one took too seriously. Pineapple cheese spread was proof that joy did not have to be perfect. It just had to be shared. Fig preserves cake was born in the rural South, where fig trees were common and nothing went to waste. Housewives gathered ripe figs at the end of summer, boiled them down into thick preserves, and saved them for special occasions, especially Christmas. The cake was heavy, dark, and sweet, flavored with spice and syrup, and brushed with more preserves after baking for shine. Each slice tasted like the memory of warm sunlight carried into winter. It was more than dessert. It was the story of Southern thrift and generosity, of families who made something grand from what they had. The batter came together slowly, stirred by hand in chipped ceramic bowls, while the scent of molasses and cinnamon filled the room. When the first bite met your tongue, it was soft and earthy, with a sweetness that deepened as it cooled. People brought it to church socials, wrapped in wax paper, as both offering and pride. For many families, this was the closest thing to fruitcake they could afford, and it quickly became a holiday tradition. The figs gave moisture, the spices gave warmth, and the love gave meaning. Today, it is a rare sight, forgotten among simpler sweets. But in its day, fig cake was proof that homegrown ingredients could taste as rich as anything from a bakery. Swiss Miss marshmallow lovers. Cocoa packets were the definition of happiness for the grandkids. Grandma always kept a box tucked behind the tea tins, waiting for the right cold night. She would pour steaming milk into mugs, tear open those shiny packets, and let the cocoa swirl like magic. The extra marshmallows, tiny and sweet, floated to the top like snowflakes on chocolate. Kids would sip carefully, hands wrapped around the warm cup, eyes glowing brighter than the tree lights. It was instant comfort, a kind of joy you could taste. Even the adults would sneak a cup when no one was looking. The smell filled the living room, sweet, cozy, unmistakably Christmas. Swiss Miss was not fancy, but it was the kind of treat that brought everyone together by the fire, laughing and remembering what warmth really felt like. The crinkle of the packet, the swirl of the spoon, the faint hiss of milk on the stove, all of it became part of the soundtrack of December. Grandma made it a ritual: cocoa, carols, and the soft hum of contentment that only winter nights can bring. The marshmallows always melted too fast, but that was part of the charm, like fleeting snow. Every cup she poured carried her quiet gift of comfort, a sweetness that outlasted the season itself. Cranberry orange relish with walnuts was Thanksgiving brightness in its purest form. Before canned cranberry sauce became a staple, families would grind fresh cranberries with whole oranges, peel and all, mixing in chopped walnuts and sugar until it glowed ruby red. The result was tart, sweet, and bursting with freshness, a contrast to the rich, heavy dishes around it. Every spoonful was alive with flavor and texture, a mix of crunch and tang that woke up the palate. Prepared by hand, often with a hand-cranked grinder, it carried the satisfaction of true craftsmanship. It wasn't molded or uniform. It was vivid and real, a reflection of the season's bounty. Though it's been replaced by smooth, canned versions, the original relish remains a taste of authenticity. Cranberry orange relish with walnuts was more than a condiment. It was the sparkle of Thanksgiving, brightening every plate it touched. Date and nut loaf was once the quiet star of Christmas spreads, rich, dark, and humble in appearance, but heavenly in taste. Chopped dates simmered with butter and sugar until syrupy, then folded into a batter thick with walnuts or pecans. The loaf baked up dense but moist, the sweetness balanced by the earthy crunch of nuts. Served sliced and buttered, it paired perfectly with coffee or tea on chilly mornings. It wasn't a cake that sought attention, yet it always disappeared first. Every bite carried warmth, a taste that felt both old-fashioned and timeless. Date and nut loaf was a reminder that beauty often hides behind simplicity, a treasure baked for those who knew how to appreciate quiet comfort. 7-layer dip was the Tex-Mex miracle that made every 1980s party table complete. Built in glass dishes so everyone could admire its colorful stripes, It layered beans, sour cream, guacamole, salsa, cheese, olives, and tomatoes, like edible art. It was food you could see, food that invited curiosity before you even picked up a chip. The first scoop always broke the clean pattern, but that was part of the fun. By the end of the night, it looked like a joyful mess of color and taste. Every ingredient brought its own story. Canned, refried beans for thrift, guacamole for trendiness, shredded cheese for comfort. It was multicultural celebration in a casserole dish, bold and unapologetically 1980s. Kids loved it for the color, adults for the spice, and everyone for the ease of it all. It turned any table into a fiesta, even under twinkling Christmas lights. In every creamy scoop was proof that food could be both casual and festive, both homemade and easy, a perfect symbol of its time. Divinity candy was the measure of a good cook's patience. One wrong move, too much humidity, a second too long on the stove, and the delicate meringue would collapse into a sticky mess. But when done right, Divinity was heaven itself. Airy, white, and kissed with vanilla, sometimes folded with nuts or coconut for texture. It was a candy that felt alive under your fingers, cooling into soft clouds that melted on the tongue. Making it was a holiday ritual, requiring timing, precision, and quiet concentration. Mothers and daughters would whisper over the pot, testing the syrup's readiness with practiced eyes. When the mixture reached perfection, it was spooned onto wax paper in little peaks, each one a triumph. Divinity was not flashy, but it carried a quiet grace, a symbol of the care and love poured into every Christmas kitchen. Today, few dare to attempt it, but those who do understand that the name was no exaggeration. Heinz apple cider vinegar was not the star of the table, but without it, half the recipes would never have worked. Grandma used it for her red cabbage slaw, her pickled beets, and her Christmas chutneys that glistened like jewels in glass jars. The tang of vinegar filled the house days before Christmas as she prepared batches for neighbors and family. It cut through the sweetness of the season, giving everything balance. She always bought extra bottles, certain she would need more. There was something honest about that sharp, clean scent. It spoke of hard work and preservation, of old traditions carried through new times. Heinz vinegar turned simple vegetables into something festive, something alive. Every jar she sealed was a promise of flavor, care, and patience. It was not the kind of ingredient people admired, but they tasted its presence in every dish. When she opened a bottle, that first whiff always brought back memories of her mother's kitchen, where vinegar meant thrift and creativity. In a decade full of convenience foods and new gadgets, Grandma's use of Heinz vinegar was a reminder that some ingredients held deeper meaning than taste. They held memory itself. The golden liquid tied past to present, turning simple produce into something worthy of celebration. Every time she labeled a jar or poured it into a simmering pot, she was bottling more than flavor. She was preserving her own history. Mashed rutabagas with nutmeg were once the star of the winter table, earthy, fragrant, and golden as sunlight. Before potatoes became the universal staple, rutabagas were cherished for their subtle sweetness and ability to thrive in cold soil. Peeled, boiled, and mashed with butter and cream, they became velvety smooth, and a sprinkle of nutmeg added a touch of elegance that transformed their humble roots. Their aroma filled kitchens with warmth and comfort, and their color brightened the plate beside roast turkey or pork. This dish spoke of simplicity at its finest, unassuming, nourishing, and deeply satisfying. Older generations swore by its taste, claiming no vegetable paired better with gravy. But as time passed and preferences shifted, rutabagas were replaced by more familiar mashed potatoes, leaving behind only memory and old recipe cards. Mashed rutabagas with nutmeg were the quiet soul of Thanksgiving, a reminder that even the simplest roots can yield something beautiful. Prune cake with buttermilk glaze was a Southern heirloom, soft, sticky, and sweet enough to stop conversation mid-bite. Chopped prunes disappeared into the batter, leaving only a deep, mellow sweetness behind. The cake baked up rich and golden, the scent of cinnamon and brown sugar filling the air. Once cooled, It was draped in a silky buttermilk glaze that soaked into the crumb like a sigh. It wasn't flashy, but it didn't need to be. Its warmth spoke louder than any decoration. Prune cake was memory in motion, a dessert that tasted like kindness itself. It was a recipe that lived in handwritten cards and old church cookbooks, passed quietly from one kitchen to another. The prunes, boiled soft before baking, added moisture that made the cake last for days without drying out. Served with coffee on Christmas morning or wrapped as a gift for neighbors, it was a gesture of care disguised as dessert, humble, honest, and utterly Southern. Cheese ball towers were monuments of the 1980s holiday pride, standing tall in shimmering pyramids of cream cheese, herbs, and chopped nuts. Every family had their secret mix: cheddar, pimento, or maybe a hint of Worcestershire, rolled by hand and dusted with parsley until they gleamed like edible ornaments. They sat proudly in the middle of buffet tables, surrounded by buttery crackers, celery sticks, and laughter that carried from room to room. Guests would chip away at them through the night, reshaping the tower until it looked like a melted snowman of cheese and memory. The clink of cocktail glasses, the glow of tinsel, the hum of Bing Crosby on vinyl. These were the sounds that went with every bite. The cheese ball tower was never about fancy ingredients. It was about the ritual of gathering, of making something by hand and watching it disappear as conversations warmed. It was creamy, crumbly, and nostalgic in every sense. By the end of the night, only crumbs and a few broken crackers remained, proof that it had done its job. A 1980s Christmas party was not complete without it. A glittering tower of comfort, joy, and unapologetic excess, sitting proudly beside the punch bowl like an edible memory of merrier times. Cornflake Christmas wreaths were sticky, sweet, and green, the kind of treat that made every child's eyes light up in the 1960s. They were crafted from melted marshmallows, butter, and cornflakes, tinted with food coloring and dotted with tiny red candies. Simple, messy, and irresistible, these wreaths were a mother's quick solution for something festive without breaking the budget. Children shaped them by hand, their fingers coated in syrupy sugar, while laughter filled the kitchen. No one cared if they looked uneven or stuck to the wax paper. The fun was in the making. These little wreaths symbolized everything pure about mid-century Christmas joy, creativity, resourcefulness, and togetherness. They cooled on countertops, glistening like ornaments you could eat, waiting to be carried to school parties or shared after church. They might not appear on holiday tables today, replaced by sleek desserts and store-bought cookies, but their memory lingers like the sound of wrapping paper and carols. One bite could still take anyone back to the warmth of a simpler season. Domino Brown. Sugar bricks were the kind of ingredient that made you feel powerful just breaking them apart. Grandma kept hers sealed in a tin, and when she opened it, the scent of deep molasses filled the air. The sugar was packed tight, hard enough to need a fork or spoon to loosen. It was the key to gingerbread cookies, caramel glazes, and old-fashioned baked apples that steamed on the windowsill. She measured it by instinct, not by cup, pressing it down and smiling when it held its shape. Domino brown sugar gave her desserts their soul. It made everything darker, warmer, and more alive. When she stirred it into a saucepan for glaze, the sound of the spoon scraping against the pot felt like music. Those bricks softened in her hands, melting into pure sweetness, and by the end, the whole kitchen smelled like heaven. Carrot and raisin salad was sunshine in a bowl, bright, wholesome, and bursting with cheer. It appeared on mid-century Thanksgiving tables like a welcome breath of freshness among casseroles and gravies. Shredded carrots gleamed orange and crisp, their sweetness amplified by plump raisins and a creamy dressing made from mayonnaise, sugar, and sometimes lemon juice. The mix was simple but magical, its sweetness balancing the savory dishes around it. Housewives cherished it for its ease. No cooking, no fuss, just a quick toss and chill. It represented a time when beauty and thrift walked hand in hand, when even the humblest ingredients could create color and joy. Some families added pineapple or coconut for extra brightness, others kept it plain, just as their mothers did. Served in glass bowls or on lettuce leaves, it caught the light like edible sunshine. Children loved it most, eating it between bites of turkey and mashed potatoes, smiling at its sweetness. Over the years, as salads turned green and health trends changed, this cheerful orange classic slipped quietly away. But to those who remember, its taste is pure nostalgia. Afternoons filled with laughter, linoleum floors warm under bare feet, and family gathered close. Carrot and raisin salad wasn't just food, it was happiness served cold. Chocolate mayonnaise cake was born from thrift but remembered for indulgence. During the Depression, cooks replaced butter and eggs with mayonnaise, a trick that gave the cake an unbelievable moistness and depth. Baked dark and rich, it tasted like a secret no one wanted to share. Frosted with chocolate or coffee icing, it felt like luxury without waste. The texture was dense but soft, every bite melting like silk. It became a surprise Christmas favorite, proof that necessity could create beauty. Families who couldn't afford extravagance still found joy in a single square of this tender, glossy cake. Chocolate mayonnaise cake was resourcefulness turned delicious, proof that creativity is its own kind of wealth. The mayonnaise worked its quiet magic, adding tang and moisture that outshone any butter-based recipe. Grandmothers swore by it, baking it for holidays and birthdays alike, knowing guests would never guess the secret ingredient. Served with a tall glass of milk or a scoop of ice cream, it was proof that thrift could taste divine. Mini quiches were the bite-sized miracle of 1980s Christmas gatherings. Tiny, flaky rounds filled with creamy eggs, cheese, and dreams of sophistication. Lorraine with bacon, spinach for the vegetarians, ham for the hearty eaters. Each flavor promised a little indulgence in one neat golden circle. They came straight from the freezer, popped into the oven, and emerged smelling like warmth itself. No one cared that they were store-bought. They were tiny, perfect, and endlessly refillable. Stacked on silver platters beside crystal glasses and paper napkins shaped like poinsettias, they represented effort without exhaustion. Party guests hovered around them, spearing one after another with toothpicks as conversation flowed. Each bite melted in the mouth, buttery and delicate, a little piece of comfort dressed up as luxury. They were the edible soundtrack to the 1980s, efficient, elegant, and just a little indulgent. By the time the tray was empty, the room felt lighter, the laughter louder, and the memory sealed in butter and pastry. People today might find it too rich or too much work, but that was the point. It was meant to be made together, to take time, to stir stories between sips. The foam clung to the rim of the cup, the same way joy clung to the season itself. Ribbon salad mold was the crown jewel of mid-century Christmas buffets, an edible rainbow layered in shimmering tiers of gelatin and cream. Every church potluck and family supper table in the 1950s seemed to have one, its wobbly surface glistening under the soft glow of tinsel-covered lights. Housewives poured each layer with precision, lime, strawberry, pineapple, waiting for one to set before adding the next. The cream cheese middle was the star, cutting the sweetness with a soft tang that made the whole thing sing. It was a dish born of pride and presentation, not convenience. People admired it more than they ate it, marveling at its even stripes and jewel tones. When refrigerators became the heart of the modern kitchen, gelatin molds became a symbol of progress, and ribbon salad mold ruled the holidays. Over time, it vanished, dismissed as a relic of artificial color and outdated taste. Yet, for those who remember, its wobble was more than food. It was a reflection of an age that believed every meal deserved a little glamour. Dream Whip dessert topping mix was the miracle that turned every pie into a masterpiece. Grandma loved it because it did not need refrigeration, and in a crowded 1970s kitchen, that was a blessing. She would pull the little box from the cupboard, whisking milk and powder until it turned into a cloud of sweetness. Dream Whip was not just whipped topping, it was anticipation, the last touch before dessert reached perfection. It crowned lemon meringue pies, coated chocolate puddings, and softened the edges of even the toughest fruitcakes. You could taste the joy in every spoonful, light but indulgent, familiar yet special. Grandma always had an extra box tucked away just in case guests showed up unexpectedly. Dream Whip was holiday assurance, the creamy promise that no dessert would ever feel unfinished. Cranberry mold salad was the showstopper of the 1950s Thanksgiving table. Shimmering and jewel-toned, it was made from gelatin mixed with cranberry sauce, crushed pineapple, chopped nuts, and sometimes even celery for crunch. It wasn't just food, it was centerpiece art. Served in ring molds or glass bowls, it glistened under dining room lights like a ruby. Every bite was tart, sweet, and nostalgic, a perfect balance between dessert and salad. For housewives of the mid-century, it represented hospitality and creativity. Making it was a ritual, pouring, chilling, and unmolding with care. Over time, as homemade dishes gave way to simpler canned options, this wobbly wonder faded from holiday spreads. But in memory, it still sparkles, a reminder of an era when even salad dressed for the occasion. Cranberry mold salad was joy in solid form, a dish that truly shined at Thanksgiving. Old-fashioned fruitcake with brandy was once the queen of Christmas tables, baked weeks in advance and aged like fine wine. Dense with candied fruit, nuts, and spice, it was soaked over and over in brandy until it gleamed like dark mahogany. Wrapped in cloth and tucked away, it grew richer by the day, its flavors deepening with time and care. Every slice told a story of patience, generosity, and tradition, of families who believed the best things were worth waiting for. It wasn't just dessert. It was a ritual, a mark of skill and pride passed down through generations. Though it's joked about now, those who remember it know its secret, how the brandy softened the crumb and perfumed the air, how one bite could taste like both memory and celebration. Fruitcake was a holiday heirloom, made to last, made to be shared, and made with love that refused to fade. Pigs in a blanket were pure happiness wrapped in crescent dough, little cocktail sausages tucked into golden pastry, brushed with butter, baked until puffed and warm. No appetizer vanished faster. People hovered near the oven just to grab them fresh off the tray. You could hear the laughter and smell the nostalgia before they even reached the table. They were the snack that broke down barriers, eaten by everyone from kids in footy pajamas to grandparents sipping eggnog. The texture was soft yet crisp, the taste salty, buttery, and deeply comforting. Each one disappeared in 2 bites, followed by that inevitable reach for another. You could dip them in mustard, ketchup, or nothing at all. They were perfect either way. In a decade obsessed with convenience and joy, Pigs in a Blanket delivered both. They were bite-sized celebration, proof that the simplest things are sometimes the most unforgettable. Tom and Jerry Batter Drink was the toast of every mid-century Christmas gathering, a warm and frothy cocktail that carried the hum of laughter and the glow of holiday lights. It was not just a drink, it was a ritual. Families gathered around punch bowls, the air heavy with the scent of nutmeg and rum, while someone carefully folded beaten egg whites into yolks and sugar. The result was a velvety batter spooned into mugs and topped with hot milk or brandy, frothing like a winter cloud. It was sweet, heavy, and meant to be sipped slowly while the record player hummed in the background. The Tom and Jerry was not for the faint-hearted. It took patience to make and could curdle with a careless stir. But those who mastered it had bragging rights, and each cup felt like liquid nostalgia. It was America's own festive elixir, a recipe that brought warmth to cold rooms and turned gatherings into memories. Shredded coconut snowflake. Tins were small pieces of joy before the baking even began. Grandma would bring them out with ceremony, their glittering metal lids shining under kitchen lights. The smell of coconut filled the air the second the tin opened, sweet and warm like the promise of snow. She sprinkled it over cakes, rolled it into candy balls, and pressed it gently onto frosting until every dessert looked like it had been dusted by winter itself. Kids would steal pinches, pretending they were just helping. The tins emptied fast, but they left behind the prettiest desserts you could imagine. By Christmas morning, the counters sparkled with coconut-covered memories, each bite tasting of sugar and nostalgia. Those tins were more than ingredients. They were decorations, relics of a season that glowed even without snow. Candied carrots with orange glaze were the sunshine of the Thanksgiving table, a dish that glowed as brightly as the spirit of the day itself. Slender carrots, peeled and sliced, were simmered gently with butter, brown sugar, and a splash of orange juice until tender and glossy. As the syrup reduced, it coated every piece in a golden sheen, the fragrance of citrus and caramel drifting through the kitchen. Housewives of the 1940s and 1950s adored this recipe, not just for its beauty, but for the optimism it brought to the table. It symbolized better days after years of rationing and scarcity. The vibrant orange mirrored the era's fascination with color, abundance, and cheer. Served in sparkling glass bowls or Pyrex dishes, the carrots caught the light like jewels, a touch of brightness among the earthy tones of the feast. Children loved their sweetness. Adults appreciated their elegance. They offered a reminder that simple ingredients could still create wonder. As tastes grew more complex, this humble side faded from modern menus. But in its time, candied carrots with orange glaze represented hope, sweet, steady, and radiant, the kind of joy that came from turning the ordinary into something beautiful. Pineapple upside-down Christmas cake was joy baked in cast iron. Rings of golden pineapple and ruby cherries caramelized under brown sugar glaze, their syrup seeping into a buttery yellow cake beneath. When turned out, it gleamed like stained glass, bright, bold, and utterly irresistible. The flavor was tropical sunshine in the heart of winter, the kind of sweetness that made people smile before the first bite. Served warm with a dollop of cream, it felt like celebration itself. Pineapple upside-down Christmas cake was proof that even in the coldest months, joy could still rise golden from the oven. Some cooks added crushed pecans to the topping or a dash of rum for extra warmth. Others made it in square pans and served it in neat slices, the fruit shining like jewels against the golden crumb. Every version carried the same feeling. Cheer baked into every layer, happiness turned edible. Crab rangoon was a touch of exotic elegance in the 1980s suburbia, a golden fried triangle filled with cream cheese and imitation crab. It was the kind of dish that made people feel worldly, even if it came from the local supermarket freezer. Fried crisp and served on shiny platters, it crackled when bitten, revealing a creamy center that felt like luxury. The flavor was sweet, savory, and unfamiliar enough to spark conversation. Guests would nibble and nod, declaring it different but delicious. It symbolized a decade of culinary adventure, when American kitchens flirted with the flavors of the world without ever leaving home. The sound of laughter mixed with the crunch of pastry, and soon the platter would be empty, save for crumbs and conversation. Crab rangoon was the 1980s version of daring. A little risky, a little indulgent, and always worth remembering. Date nut bread was once the quiet soul of Christmas baking, rich and dark with the scent of coffee and spice. It was baked in small loaf pans, wrapped in wax paper and tied with ribbon before being shared with neighbors and friends. Each slice told a story of thrift and love, sweetened with chopped dates and crunchy walnuts. The Depression-era kitchen was full of such recipes, born not from abundance, but from imagination. Dates added sweetness when sugar was scarce, and nuts stretched the batter further without waste. Served warm with butter or cream cheese, it was both humble and indulgent. Date nut bread was a gift you baked, not bought, and in that act of giving, it became something sacred. Today, it is mostly forgotten, lost among flashier desserts and faster lives. But if you ever taste it again, the deep caramel flavor, the softness, the quiet comfort, you will remember that some of the richest things come from the simplest hands. Carnation breakfast bars were Grandma's secret weapon before sunrise on Christmas morning. While the house slept, she unwrapped one, poured her coffee, and started her day. Those chewy bars were packed with oats, milk, and chocolate, everything she needed to keep going through hours of cooking. They tasted simple, comforting, and a little nostalgic, like the idea of nutrition meeting indulgence. She never told anyone that was her breakfast, but you could see the empty wrapper tucked behind the flour tin. It was her private ritual, her little moment of peace before the chaos began. Carnation bars kept her standing, smiling and humming through the morning. They were fuel made for mothers and grandmothers, the quiet strength behind every Christmas feast. They were also a glimpse into the future, a time when women began leaning on convenience without apology. That small bar symbolized independence, self-care, and quiet resilience. Between batches of cookies and roasts, she took a bite, savoring both energy and solitude. It was not fancy, but it was enough, and that was all she needed to keep Christmas running. Filled with dried fruits, spices, and sometimes sweet or meat, it was rich, dark, and deeply aromatic. Its scent alone could fill a home with warmth and expectation. This pie told stories of early settlers who stretched what they had into something celebratory. The filling was simmered slowly, seasoned with nutmeg, cinnamon, and clove, flavors that tasted like history itself. Mince pie wasn't light or fleeting. It was meant to be savored, slice by slice. For generations, it sat proudly beside pumpkin and apple pies, holding its own as the taste of tradition. Today, it's nearly vanished from holiday tables, replaced by easier, milder desserts. But for those who remember, mince pie was more than food. It was the taste of gratitude, memory, and time well kept. Sweet and sour meatballs glistened like ornaments in their glossy red glaze, a dish that looked as festive as it tasted. The sauce, made from vinegar, brown sugar, and ketchup, was bright, tangy, and addictive. Every bite was a perfect mix of savory and sweet, soft meat and sticky coating. They were cooked in big pots or bubbling slow cookers, always disappearing before dessert. Guests loved their balance of comfort and flair, that mix of home-style heart and party energy. You could smell them from the hallway, that sweet tang announcing celebration. They were the kind of food that stuck with you, both literally and in memory. The glaze clung to every bite, leaving that telltale shine on fingers and napkins. Even the smallest serving could fill a plate with warmth, laughter, and conversation. They were the life of the table, the centerpiece no one wanted to admit they came back for twice. Sweet and sour meatballs were not just food. They were the feeling of being together, of sharing something simple that somehow tasted like joy itself. No holiday table felt right without them. They were pure 1980s spirit, unapologetically bold and joyfully indulgent. Molasses stack cake was the story of Appalachian Christmas told in layers. Thin sheets of spiced molasses cake were stacked high with apple filling in between, each one spreading just a little as the days passed. By Christmas Eve, the layers had softened into one, rich with spice and fruit. It was never rushed. It couldn't be. And that patience made it taste like nothing else. Sweet, tangy, and fragrant, it was a labor of love passed from hands that measured by memory, not cups. The cake was often served in thin slices, shared with reverence. Molasses stack cake was not just dessert. It was time made edible, a gift from one generation to the next, flavored with endurance, love, and a little mountain magic. Families used dried apples cooked down slowly in iron pots, thickened until they could spread like jam. The scent filled cabins with warmth, even on the coldest December nights. It was a cake that demanded community. Sometimes each woman in a town baked one layer, joining them all together at the end as a symbol of kinship. No frosting, no frills, just the taste of patience and pride. Cocktail rye with cream cheese and caviar was the 1980s dream of sophistication. A small-town attempt at luxury served on napkins printed with gold snowflakes. Tiny rectangles of dark bread topped with white cream cheese and dotted with black caviar, proof that anyone could feel glamorous for a night. Guests leaned in curiously, unsure whether to take one, until someone brave did and declared it surprisingly good. The contrast of salty and smooth, rich and cool, was unforgettable. For a moment, every living room felt like a five-star restaurant. It was indulgence reimagined, wrapped in thrift and hope. Even if the caviar came from the grocery store, the feeling was real. It captured the 1980s dream, aspiration, creativity, and a touch of make-believe. Each bite was a celebration of what it meant to host with heart, to create elegance from imagination and turn ordinary nights into something special. Pineapple upside-down cake was the 1950s Christmas showpiece, bold, buttery, and unapologetically glamorous. Housewives lined pans with pineapple rings, placed a single cherry in each golden circle, and poured sweet batter over the top. When baked and flipped, the cake revealed a glossy caramel glaze that glimmered under silver tinsel and candlelight. It was both dessert and decoration, proof that modern homemaking could be as stylish as it was satisfying. Pineapple was exotic then, a taste of faraway places, and serving it on Christmas felt like luxury. This cake captured that spirit of optimism, when color and sweetness were symbols of progress and cheer. Families sliced it warm, each piece crowned with its perfect ring, the sugar syrup dripping like honey. Though trends have changed and its retro shine has faded, one glance at that golden top can still make you think of laughter, bright dresses, and the hum of an old holiday radio. Spry pie crust mix was the kind of helper Grandma kept hidden until she truly needed it. A pre-mixed blend of flour and shortening, it saved her tired hands on long baking days. She called it her Christmas backup plan. It gave her pies that same flaky texture she was known for, even when she was too busy to start from scratch. The box was plain but dependable, a quiet promise of success. She used it for apple, pecan, and chocolate pies alike, never once feeling guilty about the shortcut. Spry was her secret relief, a small grace during the chaos of the holidays. When guests praised her crust, she would smile, never letting on that her secret came from a box. In the end, no one cared. What mattered was the love baked inside. The Spry mix stood for something greater than convenience. It was the balance between tradition and change. It showed that care could come in many forms, even in something store-bought. When the oven timer chimed and the scent of baking pies filled the air, the mix's magic became indistinguishable from homemade. It carried the spirit of the era, when women worked smarter, not harder, and still made beauty out of simplicity. Ginger ale. Glazed ham shimmered like a holiday jewel. Coated with brown sugar and basted with ginger ale, it baked into a glossy, golden masterpiece that perfumed the house with warmth and spice. The soda added sweetness and a subtle tang, caramelizing perfectly in the oven's heat. Often served alongside turkey for large family gatherings, it was the dish that meant abundance, 2 main courses instead of 1. The glaze formed a sticky, crackling crust that guests remembered long after the meal. For many mid-century families, this ham symbolized celebration without extravagance, transforming an everyday cut of meat into something grand. Today, it's rare to find on Thanksgiving tables, but its sparkle still lingers in family recipe boxes. Ginger ale glazed ham was proof that a little creativity could turn any meal into a feast. Applesauce spice cake was a wartime miracle that never lost its charm. Made when sugar and butter were scarce, it relied on applesauce for sweetness and moisture, transforming necessity into art. The batter shimmered with cinnamon, cloves, and ginger, the scent filling the air like nostalgia itself. It baked into a tender, fragrant loaf, dark and dense yet impossibly light. Served plain or topped with powdered sugar, it was humble but elegant, the kind of cake that made every guest feel welcome. Applesauce spice cake was the quiet joy of the holidays, proof that even in hard times, comfort could be found in a mixing bowl and an oven's glow. Some families added raisins or chopped nuts, stretching the recipe just a little further, while others left it simple and pure. The applesauce gave it a moistness that kept for days, growing better with time. It was a dessert that spoke softly but lingered long, a sweet reminder that love doesn't need luxury to last. mini sausage stuffed mushrooms, were the gourmet secret weapon of 1980s hosts. Button mushrooms, hollowed out and filled with spicy sausage, breadcrumbs, and cheese, baked until bubbling and golden brown. The smell alone made guests drift toward the kitchen. They looked elegant, tasted rich, and felt like something straight from a restaurant menu. Each bite was a burst of flavor, savory, creamy, and satisfying. They were proof that you didn't need training to cook something impressive. You just needed an oven and courage. The host would serve them proudly on a platter, smiling as they vanished within minutes. For many families, these mushrooms were the first fancy appetizer they ever made. They turned ordinary kitchens into holiday showcases and small moments into memories. Stuffed mushrooms were where ambition met comfort, perfectly baked and perfectly 1980s. Eggnog pie was a silky, golden dream poured into a flaky crust, carrying all the warmth of Christmas in every spoonful. It began as a clever way to stretch leftover eggnog into something new, but soon it became a holiday classic in its own right. The filling was rich with nutmeg, rum extract, and creamy custard, baked until just set and chilled until smooth. It was the kind of dessert that did not shout for attention. It simply waited quietly to be remembered. Families would top it with whipped cream or dust it with spice before serving it after long dinners filled with laughter. Eggnog pie was more than just dessert. It was the final note of harmony at the end of a perfect day. Its soft sweetness lingered, echoing the songs on the radio and the faint glow of tree lights through frosted windows. In a world that moves too fast now, there's something deeply comforting about a pie that asks you to slow down and taste the season. Orange slice candy for fruitcake was the sparkle in Grandma's baking. Sticky, bright, and cheerful, those little candies brought life to every loaf. She would slice them with care, mixing them with nuts and raisins until her kitchen looked like a stained glass window in motion. The scent was citrus and sugar and something purely Christmassy. No one could resist sneaking a piece from the mixing bowl. When the fruitcakes came out of the oven, golden and heavy with sweetness, you could see the candies glowing through the crumb. They were simple, affordable, and perfect, a treat that turned practicality into art. Grandma never made just one fruitcake either. She made several, each packed with those orange gems because she knew they would not last long. In every slice, there was joy that money could not buy. Mock oyster soup was one of the Great Depression's most inventive creations, a meal that tasted luxurious without needing luxury. Families who couldn't afford fresh seafood found a way to mimic the flavor and texture of oysters using crumbled saltine crackers simmered in milk, butter, and onion broth. The crackers softened just enough to take on a silky bite, while the milk created a comforting, creamy base. A dash of Worcestershire sauce or celery salt gave it a faint sea aroma, enough to trick both the nose and the memory. Served with a sprinkle of pepper, it looked and felt like the real thing, warm, hearty, and homey. This dish symbolized the resilience of American cooks, especially women who refused to let scarcity steal dignity from the dinner table. It wasn't about imitation, it was about imagination. Mock oyster soup turned everyday ingredients into something that felt special, proving that even in hard times, hope could simmer quietly on the stove. Red velvet loaf cake was Christmas elegance in its simplest form. Before it was trendy, it was tradition, baked in loaf pans, dusted with sugar instead of frosting, and sliced for guests who dropped by unannounced. The crimson crumb came from cocoa and buttermilk, rich but balanced, striking without shouting. It was a cake meant for sharing, one that looked like it belonged beside candlelight and carols. Every bite was soft, tangy, and deeply comforting. Red velvet loaf cake was grace wrapped in simplicity, a reminder that beauty doesn't always need icing. Sometimes it just needs heart. Housewives made it days in advance because it aged beautifully, the flavors deepening over time. It was often wrapped in wax paper and tied with string, ready to gift or serve with coffee. The red hue felt festive, a little daring for its time, the color of joy itself. It was timeless, humble, and elegant all at once. Holiday cheese logs with almond coating were edible jewelry for every buffet table. Smooth blends of cream cheese, shredded cheddar, and seasonings were rolled tight, then coated in toasted almonds or herbs for sparkle. They were chilled, sliced, and served with crackers, each round a tiny portrait of holiday cheer. Some logs came speckled with dried cranberries or shaped into festive trees, others stayed classic and golden. Either way, they were a sign of care, the kind of food that required time but gave back joy. Guests hovered with knives, spreading the creamy mixture onto crisp crackers as carols played. There was always something deeply comforting about its simplicity, soft cheese, crunch, and nostalgia. It represented the 1980s perfectly, rich, colorful, and just a little over the top. In a decade of big hair and bigger appetites, the cheese log reigned supreme as the ultimate party indulgence. Molasses taffy pull was not just a recipe. It was a ritual of laughter and warmth that filled the long winter nights of the 1800s. Families would gather in the kitchen as the syrup boiled thick and dark, the scent of sugar and smoke curling into the rafters. Once the mixture was poured out to cool, the real fun began. Buttered hands pulling and stretching the golden ribbons until they turned pale and glossy. It was sticky work, but it brought people together in a way no store-bought candy could. Children giggled as strands tangled between their fingers, and adults swapped stories as they twisted the soft candy into ropes. When finished, the taffy was cut, wrapped in bits of wax paper, and shared as tokens of love. It was both a dessert and a memory-making event, a celebration of patience and play. Today, few kitchens see such scenes, but if you've ever pulled a strand of warm sugar by hand, you know it's more than candy. It's connection. McCormick Red Cinnamon Drops were the candy that snuck its way into everything. Grandma kept a jar of them for cookies, cider, and even decorations. The color alone made her smile, tiny red gems that sparkled like Christmas lights. She would press one into the center of sugar cookies or drop a handful into her simmering cider until the kitchen smelled like pure warmth. They melted slowly, tinting drinks a deep ruby and leaving a faint heat that lingered on your tongue. It was a small touch, but it made everything feel more alive. Children loved them for their color. Adults loved them for the nostalgia. McCormick Cinnamon Drops were a reminder that even the smallest things could make a holiday shine brighter. Sometimes Grandma would crush a few to mix into frosting, leaving little bursts of spice in every bite. Other times, she strung them like beads onto cookie ribbons to hang on the tree. The house smelled like sugar and cinnamon for days. They were candy, decoration, and memory all at once. A simple pleasure that carried an entire season inside its sweetness. In the middle of a busy holiday kitchen, those tiny red drops caught the light and made even the plainest moments feel special. Cranberry upside-down cake brought color and sparkle to winter tables. Tart berries bubbled under a layer of brown sugar and butter until they turned jewel red and glossy. When flipped from the pan, the cake revealed a shining crown of caramelized fruit, tart and sweet at once. The crumb beneath stayed buttery and soft, soaking in the syrup like a promise of warmth. It was festive without fuss, cheerful without grandeur, the kind of dessert that disappeared before the dishes were done. Cranberry upside-down cake was a holiday song in edible form. Bright, brief, and beautiful enough to remember forever. The best versions were baked in heavy skillets, their edges dark and crisp while the center stayed tender. A touch of orange zest or vanilla made the berries sing even louder, turning simple ingredients into something radiant. It was the kind of dessert that looked like effort but felt like comfort, a reminder that joy doesn't need decoration, just care and good butter. Jell-O molds with fruit suspended inside were edible art, shimmering in every color imaginable. They jiggled proudly from crystal bowls or ring molds, the crown jewel of every 1980s Christmas buffet. Cherries, mandarin oranges, or even canned pineapple slices floated like tiny ornaments inside. No holiday was complete without one, bright, wobbly, and full of personality. The first slice always drew gasps, the gelatin parting perfectly to reveal its jeweled treasures. It was the era's definition of beauty in food, fun, futuristic, and perfectly impractical. Children stared in awe, adults smiled with nostalgia, and every spoonful tasted like the sweetness of celebration. Sometimes it was made with whipped topping folded in for extra fluff, or layered by hand in stripes of green, red, and gold. No one called it refined, but everyone called it festive. Jell-O molds weren't just dessert. They were sculpture, history, and a little taste of magic on every holiday plate. Fruitcake icebox cookies were the quieter cousin of the famous fruitcake, but in many kitchens, they were even more beloved. These cookies required no baking at all, just crushed graham crackers, condensed milk, and bits of candied fruit mixed together and chilled until firm. The recipe was the perfect solution for busy homemakers balancing work, family, and a holiday meal that needed to stretch far. Each bite tasted like nostalgia, soft, chewy, and filled with the flavors of spice and sugar that marked the season. They were stored in tins or waxed paper and handed out with care, the kind of treat that improved with time. Fruitcake icebox cookies proved that you did not need an oven to make something that tasted like Christmas. They were quick, clever, and comforting, a glimpse into an age where every ingredient mattered and every crumb carried love. Today, they have all but vanished, replaced by store-bought trays and glossy desserts. But somewhere, a grandmother still remembers how the kitchen smelled when the first batch set in the cold. Instant mashed potato flakes from Idahoan were Grandma's not-so-secret trick for surviving Christmas cooking. She bought them early, stacking the boxes like treasure. They were used in casseroles, soups, and to thicken gravies when things got too thin. The flakes looked like nothing, but they transformed under her touch, turning into creamy, buttery comfort in minutes. On busy days, she mixed them with a little sour cream and chives, and everyone swore they were homemade. They were a safety net, warm, reliable, and ready for anything. Grandma never bragged about them, but she knew exactly how much easier they made her life. In the chaos of Christmas dinner, they were the quiet hero no one noticed, but everyone enjoyed. The Idahoan boxes lined her pantry shelf, symbols of practicality dressed as luxury. They freed her to focus on what really mattered: conversation, laughter, and keeping everyone fed. To her, these flakes represented modern progress wrapped in a humble package. Each serving felt like victory in disguise, a small miracle of efficiency and care. Every spoonful tasted like home, not because it was perfect, but because it was hers. Jell-O cottage cheese salad was the bright, quirky side dish that defined mid-century optimism. Lime gelatin mixed with cottage cheese, crushed pineapple, and sometimes walnuts or celery. It was a combination that sounded odd but tasted delightfully fresh. The green shimmer made it a cheerful pop on Thanksgiving tables, especially against the browns and golds of the feast. Housewives loved it because it was affordable, reliable, and eye-catching. Served molded or scooped onto lettuce leaves, it represented a time when presentation meant everything. Sweet and savory blended in every bite, the texture light yet satisfying. Though it's vanished from most modern menus, Jell-O cottage cheese salad still holds a certain charm, a snapshot of when American dining dared to be playful. It was the color of joy on a plate, unashamedly bright and wonderfully nostalgic. Japanese fruitcake was a Southern holiday classic, despite its curious name. It had nothing to do with Japan, but everything to do with imagination. Alternating layers of white cake and spice cake were stacked high, held together by a citrus and coconut filling so bright it could wake a winter morning. The texture was tender and lush, each layer soaking up just enough of the filling to grow moist with time. Made days in advance, it only got better as the flavors mingled. It was a showstopper at Christmas tables, golden, fragrant, and crowned with snowy coconut. Japanese fruitcake wasn't just dessert, it was patience rewarded, love layered, and the essence of Southern creativity baked into tradition. Families guarded their recipes like heirlooms, passing them down handwritten in faded ink. The cake took effort, zesting oranges, grating coconut, mixing by hand. But the result was worth every minute. When it appeared on the holiday table, it felt like joy itself. Velveeta and Rotel dip was molten gold in a bowl, the unofficial fuel of every 1980s Christmas game night. Just two ingredients, Velveeta cheese and a can of Rotel tomatoes with green chilies, melted together into pure, creamy bliss. The slow cooker sat at the center of the room, bubbling away as guests hovered with tortilla chips in hand. The smell was sharp, salty, and irresistible. Every scoop stretched into strings of melted cheese, the kind that made you laugh mid-bite. It was cheap, it was easy, and it was absolutely beloved. There was no pretense, just comfort in its simplest, most glorious form. People gathered around it like it was the hearth itself, dipping, laughing, and wiping hands on napkins shaped like snowflakes. No dish captured the 1980s party spirit better, communal, casual, and a little over the top. Velveeta and Rotel dip didn't just feed people, it brought them together. Boiled custard was the quiet forerunner to eggnog, a drinkable dessert that once marked the start of every Southern Christmas gathering. It was rich, silky, and just thick enough to coat the spoon, made from milk, sugar, and eggs whisked gently over low heat until the kitchen filled with the sweet scent of vanilla and cream. Families served it chilled in tall glasses, often dusted with nutmeg or topped with a dollop of whipped cream. Before eggnog's spiced boldness stole the spotlight, boiled custard was the holiday's truest comfort. Simple, pure, and patient. Children sipped it alongside cookies, while adults added a splash of whiskey or rum for warmth. It was a dessert to linger over, slow and soothing, like a lullaby in liquid form. There was no rush in making it. Curdled eggs meant you had hurried, and haste was the enemy of good cooking. Today, few take the time to stir a custard by hand, but those who do say the first spoonful still feels like Christmas morning in a glass. Turnip mash with butter and cream was once a Thanksgiving essential, long before mashed potatoes claimed the throne. Farmers grew turnips easily, and they stored well through the winter, making them dependable when other crops failed. Peeled, boiled, and whipped with butter and cream, the mash was earthy and smooth with a gentle sweetness. Its scent filled the kitchen, a mix of soil and warmth, of work and reward. Families in the Northeast and Midwest considered it a mark of a proper feast. It was simple, but satisfying, the kind of dish that reminded everyone of the farm and the land that sustained them. When potatoes became more popular and affordable, turnips faded from the plate, yet their humble heartiness lingers in memory. Turnip mash with butter and cream was food of gratitude, plain, honest, and nourishing to the last bite. Black cake was the crown jewel of Caribbean American Christmas traditions, rich, dark, and heady with rum-soaked fruit. Raisins, prunes, currants, and cherries were soaked for weeks, sometimes months, in rum and wine until they melted into a fragrant paste. Molasses and brown sugar deepened the color to near ebony, and the baked result was dense yet velvety, a masterpiece of patience and love. Each slice shimmered with warmth and history, tasting of spice, smoke, and joy. Families guarded their recipes fiercely, blending old island ways with new American ingredients. Black cake wasn't just dessert. It was memory preserved, a celebration of roots that stretched across oceans. To serve it was to honor where you came from, to taste home in every bite, to remember that sweetness, like heritage, only grows stronger with time. Every family's version was different. Some richer, some heavier with fruit, some drenched in more rum than the recipe called for. It was baked days before Christmas and wrapped in foil to rest, the flavors deepening with each passing night. When finally cut, the cake was dark as midnight and sweet as memory, the taste of history that never faded. Stuffed celery with pimento cheese was the quiet classic on every Christmas platter, the kind of snack that looked simple but carried decades of tradition. Crisp celery sticks piped full of bright orange filling, creamy and tangy with just enough bite. They added color and crunch between the heavier party foods, a fresh reminder of old-fashioned charm. Every Southern aunt and Midwestern grandmother had their version, made from memory rather than recipe. They were made early in the day, chilled, and served cold, a bright contrast to the richer dishes around them. The sound of celery snapping was as much a part of the holiday as the clink of ice in glasses. It was a dish that didn't try to impress. It simply belonged. In a sea of dips and fried treats, stuffed celery was balance, texture, and a taste of generations past. Mock pecan pie was proof that resourcefulness can taste like luxury. When pecans were too expensive or impossible to find, clever home bakers turned to oatmeal or crushed crackers for the filling. They mixed it with syrup, sugar, and butter to recreate the texture and sweetness of the real thing, and somehow, it worked. The pie came out golden, gooey, and rich enough to make anyone forget it was an imitation. During hard times, mock recipes like this kept the spirit of celebration alive when ingredients were rationed or simply gone. Families gathered around the same table, cutting into something made from almost nothing, and no one complained. It was less about what went into the pie than about what it represented: hope, cleverness, and a touch of defiance. Today, few remember the recipe, but its lesson remains timeless. Sometimes the best desserts are born from making do. Every flaky crust held a story of survival that tasted like sweetness itself. If even one of these old Christmas recipes stirred a memory, tell us which one, tap like, and subscribe so we can keep bringing forgotten traditions back to the table.